The phenomenon being seen in Final Fantasy XIV is absolutely unprecedented. Normally, when you see growth for an MMORPG, it comes from new content, new expansions. But instead, Final Fantasy XIV is seeing an absolute explosion in player growth with no new content at the moment. In fact, we're still months away from the release of Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker in November. And while we don't have exact numbers, if we were to use a tool like MMOpopulations.com, it's estimated that the number of active players has tripled since this time last year. And if you look at the game's 5-year growth graph, one thing is incredibly clear. Final Fantasy XIV is here to stay for the long haul, with the game currently being at peak popularity. For the most part, this is great news for Final Fantasy XIV fans and Square Enix, but it is definitely bad news for those poor servers, because as a result of this explosion, they are struggling, particularly in North America and Europe, with Naoki Yoshida having this to say about the European data centers. During the patch 5.58 hotfix maintenance scheduled for August 24th, we'll be changing the operating system settings for the server configuration of the European data centers, and the login cap will be increased once we confirm stability post-maintenance. Furthermore, in late September, we are also planning to replace some of our equipment with high-performance machines to further increase the cap. He goes on to reiterate that while login queues may be a little bit long right now, they are absolutely functioning, and please just have a little patience when you're logging in. It's also nice to hear that they're actually getting some new hardware. Now, this might seem like the obvious solution to all of their problems. However, in Yoshida's previous statement, he noted that it was actually hard to get new hardware for the servers, considering the shortage of silicone that's currently plaguing the tech industry. And it's also worth mentioning that in that previous statement, he said that Square was even willing to pay above market price to get their hands on this hardware. They really want to be able to sustain the growth that Final Fantasy XIV is experiencing right now. And while that's great news for everyone on European data centers, I now have some much less fortunate news to share for those of us in North America. All worlds on the Ether data center are now classified as congested. It's worth noting that popular streamer Asmongold plays on the Ether data center, and with 2.3 million followers on Twitch alone, it's pretty likely he played a good hand in increasing the game's popularity with the World of Warcraft audience. And with so many wanting to be on the same data center as him, it's no wonder that we're seeing such an explosion of popularity on Ether. As a result of this, you currently cannot make a new character on the Ether data center, at least for the time being. With Yoshi P saying, quote, "As of the patch 5.58 hotfix maintenance, all worlds on the Ether data center have been classified as congested, despite expanding the maximum capacity as much as possible and closely monitoring the situation. The number of logins for each world has constantly remained at full capacity, which led us to take this course of action. This means that players will be unable to create new characters on any world on the Ether data center until this classification is lifted. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience this will cause those of you who are looking forward to embarking on adventures with friends." Yoshida says that if any more characters were to be created, it could result in login queues taking up to several hours, and this is why the approach was deemed absolutely necessary. As such, he encourages creating your character on the Primal or Crystal data centers, which are also congested. Yoshida then closes with this statement: "To address the congestion situation, our infrastructure and development teams are working closely to plan large-scale solutions, such as expanding our data centers or adding new worlds. As previously mentioned, however, there is an ongoing global shortage and increased demand for semiconductors, and quite frankly, we are still struggling to source the required equipment. Additionally, the recent resurgence of COVID-19 cases in Japan has raised major concerns regarding our ability to travel overseas for on-site implementations. These setbacks have made it difficult for us to cut down on the time required for implementation." This is a tough situation, man. Not only are they struggling to get the actual semiconductors, due to the pandemic, they're struggling to actually even come here to actually implement the new hardware. So here is my primary concern. If all this is happening while there really isn't much new content or much new things to do, what happens happens when Endwalker comes out? Server congestion during the launch of an expansion pack is relatively normal. The player dubbed Raubon Extreme is a prime example of this, where during the release of Stormblood, the servers were incredibly unstable. An instance accessed by talking to Raubon would oftentimes see players getting kicked out during the instance due to server congestion, hence the name Raubon Extreme, as the servers were absolutely struggling. Once Endwalker comes out, we're not only going to see a big surge of brand new players again, we're also going to see a massive surge from veteran players returning to play Endwalker to see the epic conclusion to the Hydaelyn Zodiark saga. While access to Endwalker begins on November 19th, I almost feel somewhat doubtful that people will even be able to play it on that date. But with all of that said, Ultima, I want to know, have you heard of the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. Shout out to patron Tyler and the rest of the Ultima community.